There's an argument in the NBA that mid-range jumpers are the most inefficient shots in the game of basketball. That means it's better to shoot a 3 than to take a mid-range shot. I mean, if you think about it, why take a long 2 when you can take a couple steps back and get an extra point? But there are still players like DeMar DeRozan who still use mid-range jumpers effectively in their game. We are going to take a deep dive down to the reasons why some players are not using the mid-range jumpers anymore and why some players are opting to use it in their game. First of all, let's define mid-range. Mid-range is the area between the 3-point line and the paint. There was a time where mid-range was the bread and butter of the NBA and where most players would shoot in this area. But what's the reason for the decline of the mid-range? When the 3-point line was introduced in 1979, this sparked a debate whether players should continue shooting mid-range jumpers. Well, mid-range jumpers only give 2 points, while shooting behind the 3-point line will give you 3 points. However, 3-pointers far away from the basket are harder to make than any mid-range shot. The graph shows the decline of mid-range jumpers throughout the years. It went from the most popular to the least popular shot of choice. The decline of the mid-range started in the 2000s when the NBA was dominated by physical and gifted guys like LeBron James, who would attack the basket more often than rather shooting mid-range jumpers. In the 2010 era, Steph Curry revolutionized the NBA through his 3-point shooting, which greatly affected the league and made almost every player in the NBA shoot threes. Attacking the basket and shooting threes are considered more efficient according to the philosophy of MOREYBALL. MOREYBALL is derived from the name of DARYL Morey, former GM of the Houston Rockets and is currently the GM of the 76ers. MOREYBALL's approach towards how basketball should be played through analytics, which is grounded in making the most efficient plays possible in order to maximize the number of points scored per possession. And the goal of MOREYBALL is very simple: avoid shooting mid-range jumpers. The graph shows common shot locations by the Houston Rockets. As you can see, the mid-range area is almost empty as they avoid shooting in these spots. And MOREYBALL was effectively shown during the 2017-2018 season, where the Houston Rockets had the most wins in the league and secured the top spot in the Western Conference. If we look back at their stats during that season, the Houston Rockets were last in mid-range jumpers, attempting only 7 mid-range jumpers per game. But they did lead the league in 3-point shots with 45.4 attempts per game. The team was a sure championship contender, but their campaign was halted when they faced against the Golden State Warriors in the Western Conference Finals in the 2018 playoffs. I'm sure y'all can still remember what happened during Game 7, where the Rockets missed 27 straight threes. Also in that game, they shot the lowest career 3-point field goal percentage, not just in the playoffs, but also in the regular season. It goes to show that if you live by the 3, you also die by the 3. But as many years went by, many of the teams saw how efficiency is important in winning games and are slowly adapting the MOREYBALL philosophy, thus avoiding the mid-range area. If we compare the shot chart from the 2001-2002 season to the 2017-2018 season, we can see a very big difference. Although MOREYBALL exposed that mid-range jumpers are least efficient shots, it didn't stop players from shooting mid-range jumpers, and they're able to use it effectively. During the 2021-2022 season, DeRozan was leading the league in mid-range jumpers, attempting 9 per game while making 50%. And he does it so effectively that his team, Chicago Bulls, were a top team in the East. Before Kevin Durant injured his knee, he was averaging 29 points per game and shooting 55% from the mid-range. And during that time, the Brooklyn Nets were a number 2 seed in the Eastern Conference. So it leads us to this question: is the mid-range really inefficient? In the NBA, there are players who use the mid-range effectively that led their teams to championships. When the Dallas Mavericks won the championship in 2011, Dirk was leading the league in mid-range jumpers made per game. When Kobe won his back-to-back championships with the Lakers in 2009 and 2010, he was ranked second in mid-range jumpers field goals made, behind Dirk Nowitzki. Michael Jordan also led the league in mid-range field goals made in 1997 and in 1998. It was proven in history that mid-range jumpers can win NBA championships. But can this still be applied in today's era of basketball? I try to go deeper and check the past NBA champions from 2011 to 2021 and check their mid-range field goal percentages as a team, and here are the results. For the past 10 NBA champions, 3 teams boasted with the top mid-range field goal percentages. Dallas Mavericks had Dirk Nowitzki, who led the league in mid-range field goals made in 2011. Toronto Raptors had Kawhi Leonard, who was top 6 in field goals made in the 2019 season. And surprisingly, Golden State, who was known as a three-point shooting team, led the league in mid-range jumpers in 2017 and in 2018. KD and Klay were the leaders for that team. In their 2017 and 2018 season alone, they led the league in field goals made and field goal percentages in shooting mid-range jumpers. With these statistics, we can say that if a team has the ability to score from the mid-range consistently and efficiently, this can lead them to winning championships. But those stats are actually regular season stats. How about in the playoffs, where most of the plays are determined in a half-court setting? Everyone can agree that the game changes in the playoffs. The intensity is high, and nobody wants to take any possession for granted. Teams can't afford to miss a lot of shots, especially when it comes to elimination games that count the most. In the 2021 playoffs, the mid-range game was the go-to move. Of the 8 teams that advanced to the conference semifinals, 6 teams averaged more mid-range attempts in the playoffs than they did in the regular season. And the 4 players who attempted the most mid-range shots all made at least a semi-conference appearance. KD, CP3, Devin Booker, and Chris Middleton led the league in mid-range attempts while shooting with a higher percentage. The thing about the playoffs is that teams can adjust their defensive strategy, and great teams always make good adjustments. Teams that utilize more threes and layups early in the series usually get countered later. Mid-range shot creators don't only become more valuable deeper the playoffs go, they also become more valuable in late game situations when the team desperately needs a basket. For example, the 2021 NBA champions, the Milwaukee Bucks, averaged 12.8 mid-range attempts in games 1 through 3 of their 4 series. But that number jumped to 14.2 attempts per game in games 4 through 7. The Suns also followed the same trend as they took 16.5 mid-range attempts in games 1 through 3 and was jumped up to 19.5 mid-range attempts per game in games 4 through 7. That's literally almost 20 mid-range field goals attempts when they literally get into a series that starts to get deep. In an interview, Chris Middleton said this: "A lot of coaches and teams schemes, they want you to shoot threes and layups. That's what a lot of teams expect you to do. But when you stop sometimes, they just don't expect it. It gives you a clean look. So if you work on it, it almost seems like a layup or a three-point shot for myself." Well, I think the saying is 3 is better than 2, but 2 is better than 0. Fits perfectly well in this conversation. Mid-range jumpers are one of the different ways to score basketball, but I know a player who can score the basket in more ways than one, and his name is Kevin Durant. You know who he is.
I'm Kevin Durant. You know who I am.
Kevin Durant is arguably the greatest scorer that the league has ever seen. Don't believe me? You can watch this video here as I discuss why KD is the greatest scorer ever. You can click this video here, and I'll see you there.